Imagine a man sleeping inside a jungle encampment. He is a Kopassus commander, one of the most feared special operations officers in Indonesia. Around him, sentries are positioned exactly as every United States Army field manual would recommend. Tripwires surround the perimeter. Firing lanes have been cleared. Guards change shifts according to schedule. American-supplied night vision devices sit on their helmets. By every measure of modern military thinking, the position should have been impossible to penetrate. Yet, at dawn on a humid morning in September 1999, the officer wakes and discovers a single 5.56 millimeter rifle cartridge resting on his bare chest. His mosquito net has been tied differently. Not by him. Someone entered the camp. Someone came close enough to hear him breathing. Someone chose not to kill him. Instead, they left a reminder to ensure he understood exactly what had happened. The guards noticed nothing. The tripwires remained undisturbed. The jungle revealed no trace. Whoever carried out the intrusion was already several kilometers away, disappearing into vegetation so dense that sunlight rarely touched the forest floor. The officer's hands were reportedly still trembling hours later. Somewhere, high within the canopy, hidden from view, the men responsible were quietly eating cold rations and preparing for another mission. This was Operation Warden. This was the episode the Pentagon never wanted highlighted. This was the moment when the Australian SASR demonstrated that all the money, instruction, and doctrine the United States had invested in Indonesian special forces meant far less than many believed. To understand the events in East Timor, it is necessary to understand what Kopassus was and how it came into existence. The organization defeated so thoroughly by the Australians was not an amateur force pretending to be professional soldiers. It was a highly refined military instrument built over decades through American assistance, American funding, and American strategic planning. Commando Pasukan Khusus, commonly known as Kopassus, translates approximately as Special Forces Command. By the late 1990s, it stood as the most powerful elite military formation in Southeast Asia. Roughly 6,000 operators served within units responsible for direct action missions, intelligence gathering, counterterrorism operations, and unconventional warfare. Its training centers followed American models. Its battlefield doctrine reflected American instruction. Much of its equipment had been acquired through United States military assistance programs. In practical terms, Kopassus had become a product of Pentagon influence. A major part of this relationship came through a program known as JCET, the Joint Combined Exchange Training Initiative. Through this arrangement, United States Army Green Berets and Rangers routinely visited Indonesian military facilities. They instructed personnel in advanced small unit operations, long-range reconnaissance techniques, ambush planning, communication security, and jungle survival skills. The instruction was not symbolic. It involved demanding field exercises designed to create operators capable of competing with elite units anywhere in the world. American trainers supervised live-fire drills. They taught methods of counter-tracking. They shared sensitive procedures used to avoid aerial detection and establish concealed observation positions. Washington's reasoning was straightforward. Indonesia was the world's largest Muslim-majority nation. It controlled the Strait of Malacca, among the most important maritime routes on the planet. Maintaining a military aligned with American strategic interests was viewed as essential. The simplest way to ensure that alignment was to make that military dependent on American training systems, weapons, and doctrine. As a result, many Kopassus officers who completed JCET instruction returned convinced that American military methods represented the highest standard available. That assumption was about to face a severe challenge. The crisis that created the conditions for Operation Warden had been developing for nearly a quarter century. East Timor, a small territory located north of Australia, was invaded by Indonesia in 1975. The operation occurred with quiet approval from Washington and little meaningful reaction from much of the international community. For 24 years, the people of East Timor lived under an occupation later described by historians as one of the harshest of the late 20th century. Conservative estimates indicate that more than 100,000 East Timorese died from violence, famine, and disease during the occupation. Before the invasion, the territory's population had been approximately 700,000. By 1999, growing international pressure finally compelled Jakarta to permit a referendum. On the 30th of August, 1999, the people of East Timor voted. The outcome was decisive. 78.5% supported independence. The response from the Indonesian side was not acceptance. It was destruction. Pro-Indonesian militia groups, equipped, trained, and guided by elements of the Indonesian military, launched a coordinated campaign across the territory. The scale was immense. Entire towns were set ablaze. Churches sheltering refugees found themselves surrounded by armed men. Hundreds of thousands of civilians were forced from their homes at gunpoint and driven toward the Indonesian border. Dili descended into chaos marked by looting, arson, and routine violence. Journalists who remained in the territory described scenes more suitable for a future war crimes tribunal than a newly democratic nation. Behind the militia groups stood Kopassus. They coordinated logistics. They supplied weapons. They provided intelligence. In numerous cases, they directly directed operations. Australian signals intelligence had been monitoring communications for weeks. The evidence left little room for doubt. The violence was not a spontaneous reaction by civilians. It was a planned military effort that used militia organizations as a visible front. While Indonesian special forces operated from the shadows, the international response moved slowly. Diplomatic messages circulated among governments. Emergency meetings were held at the United Nations Security Council. Statements of concern were drafted, revised, and issued. Meanwhile, across the Timor Sea, Australian Prime Minister John Howard was already speaking with Washington and Jakarta. He was advocating something the region had not witnessed since the Second World War, an Australian-led military intervention. On the 15th of September 1999, the Security Council approved Interfet, the International Force East Timor. Command was assigned to Major General Peter Cosgrove of the Australian Defence Force. A veteran of Vietnam, Cosgrove presented a calm public image while possessing a tactical mindset shaped by years of preparation for precisely this kind of mission. Eventually, he would lead a multinational force exceeding 11,000 personnel drawn from more than 20 nations. Yet the true spearhead of the operation was not a multinational brigade, an armored column, or an aviation strike force. It was approximately 100 soldiers from 3rd Squadron, Special Air Service Regiment of the Australian Army. Those men were about to redefine jungle warfare. At this point, the story takes an unexpected direction. Conventional military doctrine, particularly the American approach, would likely have emphasized overwhelming force, helicopter assaults, battalion-sized sweeps, armored advances along the limited road network, massive firepower at every point of resistance, shock and force. That was the established model. The Australians studied the terrain. They examined the enemy. Then they chose the opposite approach. The reason for that decision reveals a fundamental distinction between Australian and American military culture. The interior of East Timor presented severe challenges for conventional operations. Triple canopy jungle covered the landscape. Vegetation was so dense that a person standing only 3 meters away could disappear completely from sight. Mountain ridgelines rose almost straight up from the valley floors. Rivers could be ankle deep in the morning and reach chest height after a single afternoon storm. The mud did more than slow movement. It seemed determined to swallow anything that touched it. Roads appeared on maps, but often could not be found on the ground. This was not country suited for tanks or helicopters. It was terrain built for men who viewed the jungle not as a barrier, but as the place where they operated. 3rd Squadron SASR possessed a level of jungle knowledge few forces on Earth could match. That expertise was not inherited from a manual produced at Fort Bragg. It came from a tradition reaching back through generations of Australian military experience, through the Anzacs, and even further to stockmen, drovers, boundary riders, and Aboriginal trackers whose understanding of the bush predated European civilization itself. The SASR selection process is regarded as one of the toughest anywhere in the world. Candidates are pushed to the limits of physical and psychological endurance during weeks of constant evaluation. Failure rates regularly climb beyond 80%. Those who pass are not chosen because they are the biggest, strongest, or most aggressive. They are selected for something more important: the capacity to think clearly when conditions collapse around them, the discipline to remain motionless, patient, and aware when every instinct demands action, the ability to become effectively invisible. As 3rd Squadron prepared for deployment to East Timor, its leadership made choices that would have seemed strange to many Pentagon planners. They reduced their equipment to the bare essentials. While other Interfet units carried body armor, heavy weapon systems, and communications packages requiring vehicle support, SASR patrols brought only what could be transported silently on their backs: weapons, water, ammunition, compact medical supplies, and thick layers of green and black camouflage cream covering every visible patch of skin. Faces, necks, ears, the backs of hands, even the spaces between fingers. When the process was complete, they no longer resembled soldiers from a conventional army. They looked like creatures shaped by the forest itself. Then they entered the jungle and seemed to disappear. Patrols of 5 and 6 men crossed from Interfet-controlled zones into areas that Kopassus considered exclusively their own. Their pace would have seemed almost unrecognizable to anyone trained under conventional military doctrine. Inside dense jungle, a patrol might advance only 100 meters during an entire hour. Every step was placed with extraordinary care. Branches were shifted manually, leaf by leaf, preventing even the faintest sound. Communication relied almost entirely on hand signals. When operating extremely close to enemy forces, they used a system of touches on shoulders and arms that could transmit detailed tactical information without a single spoken word. They never cooked food. They survived on cold rations. They did not smoke. They regulated their breathing to reduce scent signatures. Most movement occurred after dark, During daylight, they remained hidden inside carefully prepared concealment sites, so effective that Indonesian patrols sometimes passed within arm's reach without detecting them. The Black Ghosts had entered the battlefield. Kopassus did not even realize it. The opening stage of the psychological campaign was remarkably simple. SASR patrols identified the paths regularly used by Kopassus reconnaissance elements. These routes were believed by Indonesian operators to be known only to themselves. Then the Australians began leaving signs. Fresh machete marks appeared on tree trunks, clean, intentional, placed directly beside planned marching routes. These were not accidental cuts. They were carefully crafted messages etched into the jungle. The meaning could not be misunderstood. We know your routes. We know your schedule. We arrived before you. You never noticed. Consider the effect on a trained special operations soldier. For years, you have been told that you belong to an elite force. American instructors have certified your capabilities. You carry advanced equipment. The trails are familiar because your own people created them. Then someone reaches those same routes before you, leaves evidence of their presence, and disappears without activating a single detection measure. Suddenly, the confidence on which your professional identity rests begins to crumble. Worse still, there is no explanation, no track, no footprint. No broken vegetation indicating direction, only those precise marks cut into wood, quietly challenging everything you believed about your own abilities. Yet this was only the beginning. What followed became the kind of story still discussed throughout special operations circles with deep professional respect. SASR teams began entering Kopassus camps after nightfall. Not observation posts, not weakly defended forward positions. These were established base camps, protected by multiple sentries, cleared fields of fire, tripwires, and every defensive measure promoted through American military training. The Australians moved through those defenses the same way water passes through gravel. Quietly. Unseen. Completely. Once inside, they carried out actions designed not to destroy, but to unsettle. Mosquito nets were tied into knots while their owners slept. Personal items were rearranged. Identification cards were removed from officers' belongings and placed neatly where they would be discovered at dawn. Single rifle cartridges appeared on the chests of sleeping commanders. In at least one reported case, weapons were relocated from one side of a tent to the other. Nothing was stolen. No one was injured. The physical traces were small. The psychological effect was enormous. A Kopassus officer who awakens to find a knotted mosquito net and a rifle round. Resting on his chest needs no intelligence briefing to understand the message. Someone entered this camp. Someone bypassed every security measure. Someone stood over me carrying a weapon. Someone chose to leave a reminder rather than a wound. My survival depends entirely on the enemy's decision, and there is no guarantee it will happen again tomorrow night, or the night after that, or any night during the remainder of this deployment. That kind of psychological pressure cannot easily be addressed through training. American doctrine assumes security systems function as intended. It assumes a properly defended position cannot be infiltrated repeatedly by a small team without detection. Night after night, the SASR demonstrated otherwise. With every successful infiltration, confidence within Kopassus deteriorated further. The Indonesians eventually gave their unseen opponents a name, Hantu Hitam, the Black Ghosts. The label spread rapidly through the ranks, moving from Kopassus personnel to militia fighters and beyond. With it came a growing fear. Not fear of an enemy that could be seen, not fear of an enemy that could be fought, but fear of something invisible. Something impossible to locate, something impossible to escape. Reports began moving upward through Indonesian command structures, describing operators who refused night patrol assignments. Entire formations started concentrating into larger defensive positions. Mobility was sacrificed in exchange for a feeling of security. Patrol activity declined sharply. Militia groups that had terrorized civilians only days before started abandoning their positions and retreating across the border into Indonesian West Timor. Many left without ever encountering interfet forces in combat. The fighters who had shown no hesitation in attacking villages filled with unarmed civilians suddenly discovered they had little desire to confront an opponent they could neither locate nor understand. The SASR then increased the pressure with another carefully calculated measure, revealing a deep awareness of where their adversaries' mental limits existed. Following camp infiltrations, operators occasionally left behind small personal objects. These were items that could only have come from locations far inside territory that Kopassus believed was completely under its control. A matchbox obtained from a market in Dili, a pack of Indonesian cigarettes purchased from a vendor in a town where Kopassus maintained a permanent presence. Every object communicated the same message. We are not restricted to the jungle. We move through your towns. We pass through your markets. We can reach places where you believe you are secure, and you have never noticed us. Australian military assessments conducted afterward documented the combined impact. Within only a few weeks, Kopassus' operational effectiveness in East Timor had largely disintegrated. This did not occur through attrition. It was not achieved through air power, nor through any traditional measure of battlefield defeat. It happened because confidence in their own abilities had been systematically dismantled. The most costly Special Forces training effort ever exported by the United States into Southeast Asia had been neutralized by soldiers whose skills were shaped in the Australian bush. And while the psychological campaign continued to erode morale, the wider intelligence mission carried out by the SASR was providing interfet commanders with a constantly updated picture of the battlefield. No satellite system or intercepted transmission could have delivered the same level of detail. SASR patrols identified militia locations. They located weapon stockpiles. They monitored the movements of important Indonesian military figures. This information was passed directly to conventional forces, allowing them to enter operational areas already aware of what awaited them. Much of Interfet's broader efficiency depended on those unseen patrols. They had arrived first. They had observed everything, and they had reported their findings without exposing themselves. By late October 1999, only 6 weeks after Interfet entered the theater, the military situation in East Timor had changed dramatically. Indonesian units were moving back across the border. Militia structures had broken apart. A territory consumed by organized violence in September was being stabilized at a speed that surprised observers around the world. The United Nations Transitional Administration was able to begin operations under conditions far safer than most experts had anticipated. The personnel who contributed most significantly to that outcome received a unit citation for gallantry, among the highest collective distinctions awarded by the Australian military. Individual decorations were also presented. The details remained classified. No operator held a press conference. No operator accepted a publishing contract. No operator appeared on television discussing his actions. They returned to Swanbourne Barracks in Perth, maintained their equipment, and resumed the anonymity expected within the regiment. This was not an act of false humility. It reflected the culture of a unit that values operational success above public recognition. Within the international special operations community, however, the operation became widely respected. Veterans of the British SAS, linked to the Australians through shared regimental heritage, regard the East Timor campaign as a classic example of economy of force. Members of the New Zealand SAS, connected through the Anzac tradition that extends beyond any formal agreement, study it as an outstanding case of psychological warfare. American Special Operations personnel themselves, including individuals associated with the doctrine so thoroughly challenged by the SASR, have acknowledged in unclassified discussions and after-action reviews that the Australian method demonstrated a capability the United States military does not presently possess and may never fully reproduce. That point remains central to understanding the significance of the story. The United States military represents the most technologically advanced combat force in human history. Its special operations community operates with resources exceeding the total defense budgets of many nations. It can deploy an operator to virtually any location on Earth within 48 hours. Satellite intelligence, drone reconnaissance, precision-guided air power, a global logistics network, all are available. Yet none of those advantages proved decisive in the jungles of East Timor. The jungle is indifferent to budgets. The jungle does not care about satellites. It remains one of the few environments where advanced technology can become a burden rather than an advantage. In that setting, success depends on the individual. Skill, patience, silence. The Australians understood this reality. Their military tradition has long been built around achieving more with fewer resources. From Gallipoli, where Anzac troops held positions many professional planners considered impossible to defend, to the Western Front, where Australian tunnelers and light horse formations introduced methods that helped break trench warfare deadlock, to Tobruk, where the Rats resisted Rommel's Africa Corps for 8 months despite limited supplies and outdated equipment, to Kokoda, where citizen soldiers halted the Japanese advance through some of the harshest terrain on Earth. Again and again, the Australian military experience has been defined by people expected to do little and accomplishing far more. The SASR mission in East Timor represented another chapter in that history. A relatively small force, minimal equipment, one of the most difficult operating environments in the world. Yet results were achieved that a formation 10 times larger, supported by a budget 100 times greater, may not have matched. Not because the operators possessed supernatural abilities, not because they relied on secret technology, but because they carried something no defense contract can purchase and no training package can instantly create. They carried generations of accumulated knowledge from people who learned to survive and fight in demanding landscapes long before the first European vessel appeared on Australian shores. Some Kopassus officers reportedly left military service within months of the East Timor deployment. Others sought transfers into administrative assignments far removed from operational duties. The psychological impact remained profound. These men had built their identities around the belief that they were the premier jungle fighters in the region. They had been instructed by what many regarded as the strongest military power on Earth. The SASR did not merely challenge that belief. They shattered it so completely that rebuilding it became impossible. As for the operators responsible, many are likely still in Perth today. Some have retired. Others continue serving in different roles. All remain bound by a culture of silence. Because of that, the complete account of what occurred in those jungles may never become public. If one of those men walked past you on a city street, you probably would not notice. Average height, average build, perhaps wearing a t-shirt and shorts, perhaps discussing the cost of a flat white coffee. Nothing in his appearance would suggest that he once slipped through some of the most sophisticated defenses American funding could provide and left a rifle cartridge on a sleeping commander's chest. That has long been the Australian way. Quiet, unpretentious, highly effective, often underestimated by those who confuse silence with weakness and modesty with inability. The Black Ghosts of East Timor delivered that lesson to the Indonesian military during September 1999. And the debate over exactly how they accomplished it continues long after the operation ended. If you found this story interesting, share your thoughts and continue exploring the remarkable military operations that have shaped modern history. Please leave your thoughts about this content in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.